Hi, we continue in Luke 17 today after Jesus has told the Pharisees that the reign of God is entos. As you can see on the left side of the screen, translated here as among, but we looked last time at the details. And I want to point that out because today, as we begin this next unit, 22 to 37, Luke has tightly woven these together. So as we can see, there's a little chiasm that connects the two passages here, 21 to 23, as you can see here around the look. Here it is, and in the center, the coming of the days of the human one. If you haven't watched my other videos around this, I consistently follow Ched Meyer's work from 3 decades ago, translating the Greek for the Son of Man as human one, because that's actually more accurate to what it is with its roots in Daniel 7. It's to say that someone like a human being will replace the beasts in ruling in God's name. So Son of Man can be misleading, so I consistently use a human one like a human being. So that's the reference there. And so as we've been looking at the chiastic shape of the entire travel narrative, I noted in the introduction to this unit 1711 to 1948 how one of the faulty presuppositions that can prevent us from having solid interpretation is that these passages should be read on their own rather than in parallel to their chiastic partners, and we'll look at how this one matches in just a moment. And similarly, for our current passage, one of the presuppositions is that the days of the human one, referred to in our unit several times, refers to the so-called parousia, the second coming, which is really a doctrine developed later after the New Testament to explain Jesus' so-called delay. But at the time of the story, that wasn't the case. And parousia, which is not used in this passage, literally means being beside, ousia for being and para for alongside, and referred to the coming of the emperor or an important person to a city with an announcement or a promise of beneficence. So we'll see how that might apply in that literal sense that Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, but not because he's coming on the clouds and coming in judgment and all that stuff, which is really not what's going on in this scene. And many scholars recently have noted that, and we'll see what other options exist in comparison with that. As we look at our immediate passage, I've noted last time that I didn't have a keywords page up for the entire chapter because the chapter really isn't shaped around keywords, but this section is. And so you can see day and days 10 times in this unit. And one of the issues is going to be what's the relationship between the singular day and the multiple days, whether that's the days of the human one, or here the days of Noah, or here the days of Lot. But notice, as we can see at the beginning, in his day, the human one's day, and in the day of Noah, the day Noah entered the ark here, and the day that Lot left Sodom. So each of the 3 sets has days and day, and so we'll look at that more as we go. In terms of the chiastic partners, as I was just noting, here we will see, and we'll look at more detail at it in just a minute, how this previous unit matching over here, as we can see here across to here, expresses a contrast between Satan's kingdom and God's kingdom. In chapter 11, it was around Jesus' authority to cast out demons, and he gave the little story about if a kingdom is divided against itself. Here, it's not in those same terms, but it has to do with the human one being rejected in favor of people siding with the Roman Empire, the status quo. So neither of those are explicit in our passage, but what is explicit is the contrast between the signs of Jonah and the days of Noah and the days of Lot. And we'll see that next time because we're only going to go up to verse 25 today, so we'll look more closely at that in the next video. So 2 more things we need to look at before we enter in our passage. Most scholars would see some of the imagery that we're beginning to see unfold in chapter 17, including lightning flashing from east to west, as in the category apocalyptic. And I need to say something about that here, which is why I'm only going to cover a few verses. The Greek word apocalypsis literally means unveiling, or the verb apocalypto means to lift the veil, to reveal something that's hidden. So in contrast with the everyday misunderstanding of it as dramatic violence or the end of the world or something like that, used in secular news media to describe everything from a major storm to a big traffic accident as apocalyptic, none of those things have anything literally to do with the word. It has to do with revealing something that's hidden, which is to say, allowing people to see God's side of the veil, which is normally not directly available to human beings. And so we see a number of traditions that express that. Most famous famously in the New Testament as the book of Revelation, but it's grounded not only in Hebrew scripture throughout, as my videos on Revelation show, but also on the apocalyptic primary text before it, the book of Daniel. But there are many others that didn't make the New Testament, such as 1st Enoch, which I've noted a couple other times, has echoes into Luke. So there's an entire apocalyptic tradition here that is not about the end of the world, but it is about a moment of crisis where people need to make a decision. And Luke, unlike Mark or Matthew, has two different passages that involve that. John doesn't have any of that at all in John's gospel, and some have suggested, I have too in my book, Becoming Children of God, that in a way all of John's gospel is apocalyptic, coming from the perspective of the risen Jesus rather than the earthly Jesus. So that's for another day. But here, that's not the one I want to look at first. I want to look at this one first, so we can see our immediate passage here in the left column, and then in chapter 21, Jesus' prediction from the time period of the story of the coming down of the temple. And as you can see in small print up here, but it's initiated by Jesus saying to the disciples who were impressed by the stones, "As for these things you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another, all will be thrown down." They asked, "Teacher, when will this be, and what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" So plainly, this whole unit here, 21:5 to 36, is explicitly about the temple coming down, which didn't happen, of course, in Jesus' lifetime, but it did happen almost certainly before Luke wrote his gospel in the end of the Jewish-Roman War and from 66 to 70 and the destruction of the temple in the year 70. And almost all scholars would say that Luke's gospel comes after that. Mark's probably comes from the midst of it, trying to prepare people in an immediate way to have a response when the Romans come down upon Jerusalem. So these are very different scenes, but there are also some parallels that I color coordinated. And they're not exact verbatim parallels, but they're similar enough. One that starts with "the days are coming here and the days will come here." So it may well be that the days of the human one is the same as the days of the temple is coming down, but it might also simply refer to the passion and resurrection. In other words, it may be from within the unit of Luke's gospel rather than this one, which is somewhere between the story of Luke and the writing of it at the end. And so we see in both of them have a sense of being led astray by pretenders. They will say to you, "Look there and look here, do not set off in pursuit." And we see in chapter 21, "Many will come in my name and say, I am he." And we'll look at messianic pretenders when we get to that section there. There were many in the Jewish historian Josephus documents those best for us. We also hear that he must endure, which is to say Jesus must endure much suffering. And again, we'll look at the passion portents next time in verse 25 here, because that'll be part of what we'll look at next time. And here we'll see will affect the disciples. They will have their own passion, so to speak. They'll be persecuted and handed over just as Jesus was. We see there's a sense here in our immediate passage of people going about ordinary life oblivious, eating and drinking, marrying and planting and building, etc. And we see a warning against that here in 21, to not be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and the worries of this life, which is to say everyday life. And then we see here that the day that the human one is revealed, using the noun, the verb there, apocalypto, and then here they will see the human one coming in a cloud. It's put in quotes here because New RSV, which I'm quoting from here, recognizes it's a quote from Daniel 7 there, with power and great glory. So these are almost certainly likely to be the same thing, but when are they about, we'll have to explore when we get there. But I'd like to suggest for now that if nothing else, it's about resurrection. And we know it doesn't have to be about the end of times, because we know that in Acts, Saul, also known as Paul, experiences the risen Jesus speaking as a voice from the sky, and that's certainly not the parousia, that's the resurrection experience. And in Paul's own letters, he speaks as the power of resurrection is what keeps him going on his mission. So we also see here a question of the disciples or whoever's listening being saved from the judgment or the destruction. So here, don't come down to take away your goods, and don't go back in the field and turn back. And here, the positive side of that, stand up and raise your heads because your redemption is drawing near. So here the crisis is better get out of the way, and here the sense is something good is happening that you've been waiting for. And so we'll look more at how those are connected when we get to chapter 21. But I also wanted to show how Luke is taking a tradition, some of it's from Mark and some of it's from supposed Q, what's in common to Luke and Matthew. But I didn't bring up the Mark one here because the place to really compare Mark and Luke and Matthew is when we get to chapter 21 in Luke and compare it fully to Mark 13 and Matthew 24. But I wanted to highlight that even in our immediate passage, Luke is taking things that are from Matthew 24 completely out of order. So in other words, he's using this tradition, whether he got it from Matthew or whether they both got it from somewhere else and each arranged it to their own way. We don't know at all that Luke is rearranging Matthew or that Matthew is rearranging Luke. They may just have material that they shape in their own way. But plainly, Luke has shaped it, and you can see how very different Matthew's sequence is. If you just see the parts that are color coordinated, here the purple thing about the body and the eagles is the very end, and here it's in the middle, and here he has two women grinding, and here we have that down here. And so they carry some of the same message, but in a very different place. And similarly, as we've seen with other elements of where Luke and Matthew overlap, where they place them in their story is very different. So Matthew's here is after the confrontation between Jesus and all the representatives of the Jerusalem establishment, and so is chapter 21 as they're entering into Jerusalem and seeing that, and so is chapter 21 in Luke. Right now, of course, they're not in Jerusalem yet. They haven't even gotten to Jericho yet. So all those things help set us up for what is going on here. And let's put up the key words for a moment as we just go through these first verses. So as I noted, there is a chiasm here, and I'll put up the chiasm from 24 to 30, even though we're only going to go through 25, so you can see how tightly Luke is pulling all of this together structurally. So here, starting in verse 22, and my note below has that larger chiasm from green. I didn't put it up because it's very loose and thematic. It doesn't relate to words, and actually the disciples don't ask where in verses 22 to 24. As you can see, it's only implicit behind, they will say to you, look there, but there is no actual asking. So I don't think green's suggestion of a chiasm for the whole unit holds very well there, but at least wanted you to see it, and you can decide for yourself. So he said to the disciples, he had just responded to the Pharisees, and we noted when we did the story of the 10 lepers that the rest of the people around seemed to disappear from the story, that only Jesus and the lepers seemed to be there. But immediately in verse 20, a Pharisee asked a question, and now the disciples are there. So plainly they were there all along, but the writer and the narrator here put them aside so we could focus directly on Jesus and the lepers in the previous scene. So here he begins with, the days are coming. And as Marshall notes below, used in the Old Testament of future periods of judgment. And it's exactly repeated in 21:6, which I just showed you there. And then as no, this is not from Marshall. This is from a recent article from Juza. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, maybe Huza or Juza. He argues that the plural days refers to a collection of events, and thus, quote, the interpreter is not required to synchronize the phrase with the temporal period in verse 26, the days of the human one here, or the days here. Notice how those are exactly parallel, the days of the human one and the days of the human one, although this is not directly a chiasm in itself. It's repeated a number of times in this passage, as you can see on the right side of the screen. So he notes below further, he roots this in the prophet's own use. He says, the prophets took the liberty of calling other manifestations of God's judgment and salvation in history a, quote, day of Yahweh, even though they knew it was not the final, quote unquote, capital D day. The prophets did this whenever they saw or foresaw a historical manifestation of God's judgment and salvation that foreshadowed the great day to come. And I think that's a wonderful insight, and let's go down to his last point here before I offer my comment on that. He concludes that, quote, they, after Easter, long to see the day when Jesus will be publicly revealed as the glorious and suffering yet vindicated Messiah. Sorry for the typo there. In other words, they long to see Jesus coming as the exalted King of Israel. And we'll see that all the way into Acts 1:6, which he notes there, they will say, after the resurrection, now is the time you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel, which highlights that they really don't understand what's going on, and that's why they will not see it. And we'll look at that more closely in a moment. So they long. Epithumio is a strong verb for desire. It has a carnal overtone for like food and other passionate things. And as my note below has, as Lazarus and the prodigal son longed for food scraps, so disciples in the midst of Pharisaic, Roman authority will long for a day of liberation and justice. And note how parallel that is to Revelation 9:6. Let's look at that so you can see exactly. And in those days people will seek death but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. We could also parallel to the cry under the throne in Revelation, how long till there's justice for what we've sacrificed? But this is where the language is parallel. So either way, there's a great longing that those who've been with Jesus will see some outcome. And plainly what they're hoping to see, and we see this in the disciples all the way up through the Last Supper when they're arguing among themselves of who is the greatest, the longing for power in Jesus' name that will manifest itself when they get to Jerusalem. And that's why the key to this whole unit, as I've been showing it throughout, is the element of rejection and being prepared for rejection. But at the moment, they are plainly not. So we'll continue here. They're longing to see the days of the human one, and you will not see it. And as Green notes below, they will not see what they were looking for because they were looking for the wrong thing. The verb horao here underscores it's because their eyes are not open, which is to say it's a special kind of seeing. It's not the everyday seeing. It's the seeing with insight. It's a seeing into things. And it's not the same word, but it's similar to what we saw with the last scene where the leper saw that he was healed. He'd been cleansed, but he saw that he'll be healed. And as Lang notes below, they will not see it until the Emmaus Road when the risen Jesus walks them through the scriptures and suddenly their hearts are on fire. And Lang says they will be tempted to find what they long for somewhere else, or will they be tempted when they do not see simply to abandon hope altogether? And that's what's at issue here, that Jesus is warning them they'll be tempted to go after whoever the latest one is. And as we'll see next time, there are others that we'll look at. So continuing the parallel, as I noted there, one of the issues is who's the they? And we see different scholars suggest different voices. Marshall suggested it's possibly the messianic pretenders or the supporters of them. But my note has, but given the preceding question from the Pharisees and Jesus' repeated warnings against them, it suggests it might be the Pharisees telling him to go one way or another. But Vincent notes it could be other believers expecting an imminent end. And we know that's certainly possible because we see Paul deal with it, for example, in 1 Corinthians 15, where some people think that if some of their fellow members of the ecclesia, the church, have died before the so-called second coming, well, did they miss out on the resurrection? And Paul has to correct them on what resurrection is, and they don't have to worry about that. So look here, as we saw in the previous thing, and let's look back and see the chiastic parallel in verse 1 here, is edu, which can simply be behold there, as opposed to look, but it's twice here, and it certainly seems like it's calling people to look. So they will say to you, look there, look here, but do not go. Do not go off them in pursuit. And interestingly, the verb for pursuit here, dioko, can also mean persecute. So they'll be persecuted, but don't go off persecuting others, but literally it means pursuit here. They certainly would be off to persecute others who would purport to be the Messiah. And then we get to a key verse here. And as we do, I just want to note in passing, it does the passion portent in reverse order here in 24 and 25. So I'll show this now. I'll show it also next time. So here we see in the previous ones in chapter 9 and then the next one in chapter 18, the sequence is the bad things are going to happen to Jesus and then he will rise again. We see that here and we see it here. But in our current one, it reverses it. As the lightning flashes not from east to west here, from one side of the sky to the other, but first he must endure much suffering, which is to say the lightning flashing, just as lightning flashes and lights up the sky, is an expression of the resurrection. Notice it doesn't say lightning will flash. It's using an analogy to say just as lightning fills the sky, so will the resurrection fill the world. And we know that from the gospel stories that the resurrected Jesus is not limited to one place. In the Road to Emmaus story, when they're on the way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, they experience him walking with them and breaking bread with them in Emmaus. And when they get back to Jerusalem, those in Jerusalem had experienced him at the same time. And when we get to the resurrection, I'll suggest that it has to do with Jesus rising out of the prison of three dimensions and being able to travel freely through time and space as a fourth dimensional creature. And we'll look at that theme there. It's something that Salvador Dali takes up in his picture Hypercubic Crucifixion. So that is a teaser for what we're going to get to there. But that's I suggest what the meaning of this imagery here is. Lightning itself we saw earlier in 10:18. Let's look at that again. I watched Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. So there it was that Satan fell like simply lightning, so you'd see it coming, and that's relating back to the story in Genesis 6 about the watchers, and that's precisely a reference from 1st Enoch about rebellious angels coming down to infect human with their story rather than God's story. But here it's simply a metaphor. So it flashes, and we'll see it again in 24:4, and lights up the sky, lampe, only here in Luke, but we see similar words elsewhere about light. From one side to the other, so will the human one be in his day. But first, and that's the key here. So as Huza says again, Luke's alteration from 9:22, the one back here, creates a generalized saying that no longer functions as a definitive passion prediction, as we see that here. This does not say explicitly that he's going to be rejected by the chief priests and the rest of the Sanhedrin, the elders, chief priests, and scribes, as we see back here in 9:22. He continues, this generation then indicates a general period of time contemporary to Jesus, which extends both before and after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. And we can compare Acts 2:40 for that. One may object to the idea of Jesus' suffering and rejection after his death, but Luke insists that the exalted Jesus continues to experience these things through his witnesses, the disciples. For example, the exalted Jesus questions Saul, why are you persecuting me? And I think that's a really important point to highlight why the lightning image here is about resurrection. But first, so there's no resurrection without suffering, and it must happen, using Dei as used back here. We saw the must here, didn't highlight it. Throughout as divine authority. He must experience much suffering. Endure is not in the Greek here. So there must be much suffering. Paulapathein, again echoing 9:22, great suffering here, and be rejected by this generation, highlighting the theme that I'm suggesting is the theme throughout, that he'll be rejected by this generation. Substituted for the elders, chief priests, and scribes, who are the Sanhedrin, thus expressing the wider sense of rejection, again from Juice's article, echoing the Exodus judgment as we saw back in chapter 11. We saw that note also in the previous one. We see finally from him this generation who rejected God's salvation in Jesus and chose to secure their lives through possessions had their lives taken from them amid Jerusalem's ruin, which is his sense that what's being talked about here is not the death and resurrection of Jesus immediately, but the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. And I'd like to suggest that this one is more about the death and resurrection of Jesus in chapter 21, directed specifically at the disciples, is about preparing them for what happens a generation later. But it doesn't have to be that, and you can decide for yourself. So we'll stop there for now, and we'll finish the scene next time when we look at the days of Noah and the days of Lot. See you then. Bye-bye.